Today, we're going to explore a critical topic that affects nearly everyone past the age of 30 and almost universally after the age of 50. It's called sarcopenia, or age muscle loss. And this isn't just about aesthetics or strength. Sarcopenia directly impacts metabolic health, mobility, and longevity. The good news? We now have very compelling evidence pointing to a single nutrient that plays a central role in reversing, or at the very least, dramatically slowing this process. Sarcopenia, the progressive loss of muscle mass and strength, is often thought of as an issue only the elderly face, but the decline actually begins much earlier, around the age of 30. From that point on, the body starts to lose muscle at a slow but steady rate of approximately 3 to 5% per decade. But what's even more concerning is that this rate of muscle loss accelerates significantly after the age of 50, leading to noticeable declines in strength, mobility, balance, and overall physical function. This isn't just a cosmetic or fitness issue. Muscle plays a fundamental role in metabolic health, structural stability, glucose regulation, and even immune function. So the loss of muscle over time isn't just about getting weaker, it's directly tied to declines in health span and lifespan. The early onset of sarcopenia is often overlooked because it doesn't produce obvious symptoms in the beginning. A person in their 30s or early 40s might not notice a slow decline in muscle density or mitochondrial efficiency, but physiologically, those changes are already underway. Skeletal muscle is a highly dynamic tissue, constantly undergoing processes of breakdown and synthesis. With age, this balance starts to shift toward catabolism. The breakdown side of the equation, this shift is driven by a combination of factors, including hormonal changes like reduced growth hormone and testosterone, increased inflammation, decreased physical activity, and nutritional deficiencies, particularly in amino acids that drive muscle protein synthesis. By the time someone reaches their 50S or 60S, the effects become more noticeable. Tasks that were once automatic, climbing stairs, lifting groceries, rising from a low chair, may start to feel difficult. Muscle fibers, particularly fast twitch fibers responsible for explosive strength and coordination, atrophy first. This loss isn't just a matter of inconvenience. It increases the risk of falls, fractures, insulin resistance, and a cascade of metabolic dysfunctions that further accelerate aging. Numerous studies have shown that reduced muscle mass and function are among the strongest predictors of all-cause mortality in older adults. In short, the earlier sarcopenia sets in and progresses, the shorter the potential health span. One of the challenges with sarcopenia is that it is largely silent in its early stages, and conventional medical care doesn't typically screen for muscle mass loss unless a person is already frail. This has led to a widespread underestimation of how early and how seriously people should start addressing it. Resistance training, physical activity, and nutrition are often discussed as tools to stay in shape, but they are in fact frontline strategies for preventing a condition that affects nearly every aging individual. Even more concerning is that without intervention, sarcopenia tends to become a self-reinforcing loop. Loss of muscle leads to reduced physical activity, which in turn accelerates further muscle breakdown. It also contributes to metabolic inflexibility, where the body becomes less efficient at burning fuel and regulating blood glucose. This is especially important because muscle is the largest site for glucose disposal in the body. When it declines, the burden shifts to other organs, increasing the risk for type 2 diabetes and other metabolic diseases. Muscle mass is far more than a measure of physical strength or appearance. It is a central regulator of metabolic health, mobility, and longevity. Numerous studies have demonstrated a strong correlation between the amount and quality of skeletal muscle and the likelihood of living a longer, healthier life. The reason for this is not purely mechanical, though movement and posture are part of it. Rather, skeletal muscle acts as a metabolic organ, influencing everything from glucose regulation to systemic inflammation. As a result, preserving muscle is increasingly viewed not just as a fitness goal, but as a key pillar of disease prevention and lifespan extension. One of the most critical roles of skeletal muscle is its function as the primary site for glucose uptake and insulin sensitivity. After consuming carbohydrates, insulin signals skeletal muscle cells to take up glucose from the bloodstream and store it as glycogen. With adequate muscle mass and efficient insulin signaling, this process works smoothly, helping maintain stable blood sugar levels. But as muscle mass declines with age or inactivity, the body becomes less effective at disposing of glucose, often leading to a rise in insulin resistance. This can set the stage for metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, conditions strongly associated with premature aging and mortality. In addition to glucose metabolism, muscle tissue helps regulate inflammation throughout the body. Contracting muscle fibers during resistance training and physical activity release molecules called myokines. These act like hormones, communicating with other organs and tissues to reduce chronic inflammation, support immune function, and improve cardiovascular health. The loss of muscle over time is therefore not just a passive decline in tissue. It represents a decrease in one of the body's natural tools for maintaining internal balance and controlling the low-grade inflammation often associated with aging. Muscle is also intimately tied to mobility and functional independence. As people age, tasks like walking, getting up from a chair, or maintaining balance become increasingly dependent on muscle strength and coordination. A decline in muscle, particularly in the legs and core, can impair gait stability and reaction time, significantly increasing the risk of falls and fractures. Hip fractures in particular are linked with dramatically increased mortality in older adults. The presence of adequate muscle mass acts as both a shock absorber and a stabilizer, preventing injury and preserving independence in daily living. Beyond the mechanical and metabolic roles, muscle mass also influences hormonal balance. Physical activity and muscle stimulation are known to elevate levels of beneficial hormones such as growth hormone and testosterone, both of which naturally decline with age. These hormones are involved not only in muscle repair and growth, but also in mood regulation, cognitive function, and fat distribution. Therefore, maintaining muscle may help buffer against the hormonal shifts that accompany aging, preserving not just physical capacity, but overall vitality. When considering all these factors, metabolic health, inflammation, mobility, hormonal function, it becomes clear that skeletal muscle plays a central integrative role in health. It's not just one system benefiting from it. Multiple interconnected systems rely on adequate muscle tissue to function optimally. Protein intake is widely recognized as essential for muscle maintenance, especially as we age. However, the conversation around protein often overlooks a critical detail. Not all proteins are equally effective at stimulating muscle protein synthesis. Among the various amino acids that make up dietary protein, leucine stands out as the key anabolic trigger. Leucine is a branched-chain amino acid, BCAA, that plays a unique signaling role in the body's ability to build and repair muscle tissue. While all essential amino acids contribute to protein synthesis, it is leucine that initiates the process, acting as a molecular switch that activates intracellular pathways necessary for muscle growth. The role of leucine in muscle health becomes especially important in the context of aging. As people get older, they experience what is known as anabolic resistance, a blunted response of muscle tissue to the usual stimuli of protein intake and resistance training. This means that simply eating the same amount of protein that supported muscle growth in youth is no longer sufficient in older adults. The body becomes less efficient at turning dietary protein into new muscle tissue. What research has shown is that increasing the leucine content of each meal can overcome some of this anabolic resistance. It essentially amplifies the muscle building signal, making the same amount of protein more effective. Leucine works primarily by activating a key cellular pathway known as mTOR, or the mechanistic target of rapamycin. mTOR serves as the master regulator of muscle protein synthesis. When leucine levels in the bloodstream rise after a meal, they bind to specific sensors in muscle cells, triggering mTOR activation. Once mTOR is activated, the body shifts into a state that favors growth, repair, and recovery. Without sufficient leucine, Even a meal that contains adequate protein may fail to fully stimulate mTOR, resulting in suboptimal muscle repair and growth. The amount of leucine required to stimulate this response appears to be higher in older adults compared to younger individuals. Research suggests that a threshold dose of approximately 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal is necessary to reliably trigger muscle protein synthesis in those over 50. This typically corresponds to about 25 to 35 grams of high-quality protein per meal, depending on the protein source. Animal-based proteins like whey, eggs, and lean meats are naturally higher in leucine, making them particularly effective at reaching this threshold. Plant-based proteins tend to be lower in leucine, which means individuals on plant-based diets may need to consume higher total protein quantities or use supplementation to meet optimal leucine levels. Importantly, leucine supplementation or strategic meal planning around leucine-dense foods can serve as a powerful tool to combat sarcopenia. It allows individuals to harness the full anabolic potential of each meal, rather than simply increasing total daily protein intake, which can be harder to achieve consistently, especially in older populations with lower appetites or dietary restrictions. By focusing on the quality of protein, specifically its leucine content, rather than just quantity, it's possible to target the root of anabolic resistance and restore the body's ability to rebuild and preserve muscle efficiently. Leucine exerts its powerful muscle-building effects primarily by activating a cellular signaling pathway known as mTOR, short for the mechanistic target of rapamycin. This pathway serves as a central regulator of cellular growth, metabolism, and protein synthesis. In the context of skeletal muscle, mTOR functions as a molecular switch that tells the body when to enter a state of muscle building or anabolism. When leucine levels in the bloodstream rise following a protein-rich meal, they interact directly with nutrient-sensing proteins in muscle cells. This interaction signals that sufficient raw materials are present for the body to begin synthesizing new proteins, repairing damaged muscle tissue, and supporting overall growth. The activation of mTOR is a highly conserved evolutionary mechanism that helps the body assess energy availability. When mTOR is activated by leucine and other inputs like insulin and mechanical tension from resistance training, it initiates a cascade of intracellular processes that ramp up protein production. Ribosomes, the structures responsible for assembling amino acids into new proteins, increase in activity. This leads to the production of contractile proteins like actin and myosin, which are essential for muscle strength and functionality. In the absence of sufficient leucine, mTOR activity remains low, even if other amino acids are present. This makes leucine a kind of gatekeeper in the muscle building process. With aging, this system becomes less responsive. The threshold of leucine needed to activate mTOR increases, which is why older individuals often require more leucine per meal than younger people to achieve the same anabolic effect. This phenomenon, known as anabolic resistance, means that the same meal that might stimulate muscle growth in a 25-year-old may have little effect in someone over 60. As a result, strategies that specifically target mTOR activation through leucine optimization are becoming central to nutritional interventions for sarcopenia. mTOR is not activated by leucine alone. It also integrates signals from other sources, such as insulin levels, energy status via ATP and AMPK, and mechanical load from resistance exercise. But among these, leucine stands out is a direct and fast-acting activator. It bypasses some of the more complex hormonal cascades and acts locally at the muscle level, making its effect both potent and efficient. This is why protein sources with high leucine content, such as whey protein, are considered particularly effective post-exercise when the body is primed to rebuild muscle. The importance of mTOR goes beyond muscle tissue. It plays a role in immune function, brain plasticity, and even aging itself. However, in the context of muscle health, its activation is essential for reversing catabolic states and promoting tissue regeneration. While some have raised concerns about chronic mTOR activation being linked to aging and cancer in other tissues, the intermittent nutrient and exercise-driven activation seen in muscle is both beneficial and necessary. The key lies in timing and balance. activating mTOR at the right times, primarily after meals and training, rather than keeping it constantly turned on through excess caloric intake or sedentary behavior. To stimulate muscle protein synthesis effectively, especially in older adults, there appears to be a critical threshold of leucine that must be reached within each meal. This threshold is approximately 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal, which equates to about 25 to 35 grams of high-quality protein, depending on the source. This dose is necessary to overcome the phenomenon of anabolic resistance, which becomes more pronounced with age and reduces the muscle's sensitivity to dietary protein without hitting this leucine threshold. Even a meal that seems protein-rich by traditional standards may not adequately stimulate the muscle-building pathways needed to preserve or rebuild muscle tissue. Younger individuals can often stimulate robust muscle protein synthesis with as little as 1.5 to 2 grams of leucine per meal. Their mTOR signaling and muscle tissue are more responsive, requiring less input to achieve a maximal anabolic effect. In contrast, older adults may consume similar meals and fail to activate the same muscle-building response because the internal signaling systems are less efficient. This means that simply eating enough protein across the day is no longer a sufficient strategy past a certain age. The distribution of protein, and more specifically the leucine content per meal, becomes far more important. Not all proteins are created equal when it comes to leucine density. Animal-based proteins tend to have higher concentrations of leucine per gram of protein. For example, whey protein is considered one of the richest sources, providing nearly 10% leucine by weight. This means that 25 grams of whey protein delivers around 2.5 grams of leucine, effectively reaching the threshold needed to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Other animal proteins like chicken, beef, fish, and eggs also offer relatively high leucine content, though slightly less than whey. In contrast, most plant-based proteins have lower leucine concentrations, often requiring significantly larger servings to reach the same leucine threshold. This presents a unique challenge for individuals following plant-based diets. While it is entirely possible to meet leucine needs through plant sources, it may require strategic meal planning or the use of supplemental leucine or fortified protein powders. Blending different plant proteins to create a complete amino acid profile can help, but care must still be taken to ensure that the leucine content per meal crosses the necessary threshold. Otherwise, the meal may fall short in triggering the desired muscle-building response, even if the total protein content appears adequate. Another factor to consider is the timing and spacing of protein intake. Consuming protein in evenly distributed doses throughout the day, each containing sufficient leucine, is more effective than skewing intake toward 1 or 2 large meals. This distribution helps ensure that mTOR is activated periodically throughout the day, creating multiple windows of opportunity for muscle repair and growth. Skipping this approach or relying on protein boluses that lack adequate leucine may lead to long periods of subthreshold signaling, during which muscle protein synthesis is minimal or absent. For individuals aiming to combat sarcopenia, especially in later decades of life, hitting this leucine threshold consistently with each meal becomes a foundational strategy for maintaining muscle mass and function. Combining leucine intake with resistance training produces a synergistic effect that maximizes muscle protein synthesis and effectively combats sarcopenia, while leucine serves as the nutritional signal that activates mTOR and initiates protein synthesis. Resistance exercise provides the mechanical stimulus that sensitizes muscle tissue to these anabolic signals. The two interventions act through distinct but complementary mechanisms, and when timed correctly, they amplify each other's effects. This synergy is particularly important in aging individuals, where anabolic resistance diminishes the muscle's response to either stimulus alone. Together, however, they can overcome much of this resistance and help restore the muscle-building environment that is more characteristic of younger physiology. Resistance training, whether through bodyweight exercises, free weights, machines, or elastic bands, increases muscle tension, and microscopic damage to muscle fibers. This mechanical stress initiates a repair and growth process that is mediated by satellite cells, localized stem-like cells within the muscle that are activated by training. These satellite cells fuse with existing muscle fibers and contribute to regeneration and hypertrophy. However, for this process to result in actual muscle growth, it must be accompanied by sufficient nutrient signaling, primarily in the form of essential amino acids, especially leucine. Without adequate leucine and total protein, the training-induced stimulus may result in incomplete repair or even muscle breakdown over time. Timing plays a critical role in this combined approach. The post-exercise window, often referred to as the anabolic window, represents a period when muscle cells are particularly receptive to amino acids. Consuming a leucine-rich protein source within about 1 to 2 hours after resistance training enhances mTOR activation and protein synthesis rates. This period of heightened sensitivity allows the body to more effectively translate nutritional intake into muscle growth and repair. For older adults who already experience diminished muscle responsiveness, this window becomes especially important. Delaying protein intake after exercise may significantly reduce the anabolic response, missing a key opportunity for recovery and adaptation. Several studies have confirmed that older individuals who engage in regular resistance training while consuming leucine-optimized protein demonstrate greater gains in lean muscle mass, strength, and functional performance compared to those who follow only one of these interventions. These improvements extend to clinical outcomes such as walking speed, balance, and reduced fall risk, all of which are vital for maintaining independence and quality of life. Importantly, these benefits occur even in the absence of high volume or high intensity training. Moderate resistance exercise, when paired with effective leucine intake, can produce measurable improvements in muscle mass and metabolic health. Another key aspect of this strategy is consistency. Both resistance training and leucine intake need to be practiced regularly to produce sustained effects. Sporadic efforts, even if intense, are less effective than consistent, moderate training sessions coupled with deliberate nutritional choices. This regular engagement keeps the mTOR pathway primed and maintains muscle tissue in a state of readiness to grow and repair. As the muscle adapts over time, its sensitivity to both exercise and amino acids may improve, allowing for progressive gains even in later decades of life.